Welcome to the Circular Flow of Money PowerPoint presentation part 2. Students often wonder why they should study economics. Have you ever heard of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Mick Jagger? They both studied economics, and look at how they turned out. Today's presentation is going to be on 5 microeconomic markets in much greater detail than in the first presentation. Secondly, we're going to be getting into more detail about monetary and fiscal policy, 2 areas that really will help in the processing of what's going on in our economy on a daily basis, and often as it overlaps even into politics. This really is riveting stuff. Well, I like it. I really do. I like it. Hope you do too. Welcome back to PowerPoint presentation number 2 on the Circular Flow of Money diagram, for a deeper inspection of micro and macroeconomics within the circular flow of money. Last time, in our first presentation, we discussed the difference between micro and macroeconomics, delineating that micro would be indicated as being blue in this diagram, macro as green. So we are returning to the left side of the circle with the product market, the microeconomic aspect of this course. And in this market, there are 4 types of prototypical markets, archetypal markets, if you will. They are perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. A continuum of opposites spectrum assists in the analysis of these markets. The left side of this continuum represents markets with the greatest number of firms. In this case, perfect competition often has thousands. The right side of this continuum represents markets with the least number of firms. In this case, a monopoly market has 1 firm if it is a pure monopoly. Oligopoly markets have few firms. Monopolistic competition markets have many firms. Observe the decreasing firm populations as you move from left to right along the markets on the continuum. At the 2 opposite extremes of the product market continuum are perfect competition on the left and monopoly on the right. These 2 markets are virtually opposite. These 2 markets contain the core of the microeconomics curriculum concepts upon which we will focus this quarter. So let's move on to more detail about perfect competition. This describes a market with many firms, sometimes thousands, all selling identical, or what we would call homogeneous, products. Imagine potato farmers. Individual potato farmers do not set the price of their potatoes. The market sets the price. What this means is, when it is figured out all of the potatoes that have been produced in 1 year and the market price that it will take to clear that market of those potatoes, a price is determined. That is the market price. This is what is referred to as market equilibrium, or how the equilibrium price is set. Individual firms have no real input on setting their own price. It's easy to get in and out of the potato market. In many cases, as a farmer, it's just throwing out a different set of seeds to maybe produce onions, or to make another decision to produce another type of identical good in that market. And remember, in this perfect competition market, there is a lot of competition. At the other side of the continuum within this product market, which is all happening over on the left side of the circular flow of money, is the monopoly market, which describes a market with only one firm selling products with few to no substitutable options. Imagine your electric company. Monopolists have extreme price-setting power. This is why they are often regulated by the government. It is exceedingly challenging to get into a monopoly market. There are very high barriers to entry. Imagine starting an electric company. You may require spending over $10 to $20 billion to set up power lines in, say, the northwestern area of the United States. This might be considered a rather difficult challenge. This would be a barrier to entry. And remember, in the monopoly market, there is little to no competition. By definition, one firm in a market is not considered competitive market. The two opposite extremes of the product market continuum are perfect competition on the left and monopoly over on the right. See the vast difference between the two markets? Perfect competition has thousands of firms. Monopoly, one firm. Perfect competition, identical products. Monopoly, no close substitutes. Perfect competition, easy entry and exit in and out of this market. Monopoly, high barriers to entry. Perfect competition, firms have no price-setting power. Monopoly, firms in this market have extreme price-setting power. Not total, because even though there are not close substitutes, say for electricity, they can raise their prices a lot, but still, if it gets too high, someone can go out and buy a generator. So there are substitutes to some extent in a monopoly sometimes. Perfect competition, extreme competition. Monopoly, no competition, no significant competition. As we move left from the extreme right of the monopoly on the continuum, we encounter oligopoly markets. This is a market where there are only a few firms competing with each other. There are millions of automobiles in America being driven around on our vast highway and road system every day. How many automakers are there in the U.S.? Even counting foreign automakers selling in the U.S., there are relatively few firms compared to autos. Maybe 6 to 8 major producers who have about 90% of the market. The main aspect of this market is that firms have to place very close attention upon each other to make output and pricing decisions. Moving left again on the continuum from the oligopoly market, we encounter monopolistic competition. This is a market where both competitive and monopolistic elements exist. This is a market where there can be many firms competing with each other. Consider toothpaste. It is competitive because there are many firms. It is competitive because profits tend toward zero in the long run, just as it does in perfect competition. It is monopolistic because products, though similar, are slightly differentiated. Because of this small difference in products, firms do have some price-setting power. If the price of our toothpaste brand goes up 25 cents, even 50 cents, we'll probably still stick with it, whereas that wouldn't happen in the potato market. But since there are many close substitutes, this is not a lot of price-setting power. The factor resource market. Continuing on with microeconomics, we move to the right side of the circular flow where the factor resource market is encountered. The factor resource market is where manufacturing businesses secure the resources to produce goods purchased by households in the product market. The four main categories of business costs define the economic resources secured in this market and are called the factors of production. They are 1. Land, 2. Labor, 3. Capital, 3A. Variable cost resources, 3B. Fixed cost capital, 4. Entrepreneurship. So let's get a little deeper into the land costs of the factors of production. To economists, land costs are associated with the property and place of business. All businesses have a place of operations, and these costs are considered land costs. All resources associated with the production process, such as agricultural land, oil reserves, timber, minerals, and water, are also called land costs. Land costs are typically fixed costs, which are costs which do not change with output. Payment for land costs, such as mortgage payments, rent, or utility bills, are all considered rent costs in the vocabulary of economists. Moving on then with the second factor of production, we have labor. Labor is the term for the work, talent, and mental, physical energy applied to output, services, and physical product of a firm. Labor is generally the largest cost of doing business, outweighing all other factor resource costs by a significant amount in medium to large scale businesses, and even in many small businesses. Labor is a variable cost. Variable cost defines as a cost which will rise and fall, vary, with the amount of output of a firm. The cost of labor for firms is paid out with wages, salaries, commissions, royalties, and bonuses. If a firm is putting out very little output, labor costs will be less. If they are producing massive quantities of a good, labor costs will be large and they will be hiring more workers. That's why it is a variable cost. Number 3, capital. This refers to resources involved in the production of goods. Economists often define resources as goods which produce goods. These are two classifications of resources applied to the production of marketable goods. The first is variable cost resources, resources which vary with output. These are the raw materials which get turned into goods in production. A shirt manufacturing firm is going to require cloth, buttons, thread, and labels to make a shirt. When firms produce a lot of shirts, there's going to be large variable costs. If they produce no shirts, no variable costs. These are variable cost resources of capital. The second aspect of capital is called fixed cost capital. Capital goods, capital resource investments, connotes fixed cost infrastructure elements which involve long-run capacity decisions. Fixed resource costs do not change with output. Production machinery added to a business becomes part of its infrastructure. This is then related to the size, value, and output capacity of the firm. When firms change their fixed costs by changing their output capacity, these are referred to as long-run decisions and long-run changes. When they just make variable cost changes, those are called output decisions. If a firm produces 0 or 10,000 widgets, its machinery rent payment will be the same. Sewing machine and welding robots on automobile assembly lines are a good example of fixed cost capital. The fourth factor of production, cost of doing business, is Entrepreneurship. The owner and management entrepreneurs of a business are a major cost of doing business. Presidents, CEOs, CFOs, and vice presidents often command large salaries which must be paid. This is the management and brain power of a business. The payment of these salaries and profit-sharing arrangements are usually associated with fixed costs. So now we're moving into macroeconomics to close up this presentation. The green elements added represent macroeconomics, government and banks, the Fed, which are not in the circular flow of money. When banks or the government are holding dollars, these dollars are not in the circular flow. So first, there is the government. The government affects the money supply with what we call fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is government taxing and spending, which impacts businesses and households. The government taxes households and spends money on households. The government taxes the households through income tax, property tax, payroll tax, sales tax, capital gains tax, excise tax, estate tax. Many different ways the government cleverly has of being able to get their hands on our money. The government then has expenditures as it puts money back into the circular flow, into households, through government jobs, employment, contracts, healthcare, Social Security, transfer payments, welfare, etc. The government also taxes manufacturing businesses and spends money on manufacturing businesses. The taxes it incurs from manufacturing businesses are called corporate income tax. Expenditures are examples such as military goods contracts, infrastructure contracts, bailouts, corporate welfare, subsidies. Infrastructure refers to the capital aspects of a country, a city, or a state. Things like dams, bridges, roads, and government buildings. When the government spends more than it receives in taxes in a year, it is called a budget deficit. Budget deficits are the norm. Occasionally, the opposite occurs. This is called a budget surplus, when taxes exceed government spending. I think the last time this occurred was in 1998-99, maybe in 2000. All the yearly budget deficits added up is called the national debt. The national debt is currently at $26.5 trillion. A truly unimaginable amount. The next policy refers to the banks or the Fed, which is what we refer to as the Federal Reserve Bank, and it is called monetary policy, or I should say it administrates monetary policy. The Fed has the most effective control over the supply of money in circulation. The Fed is the national bank of the U.S. The control of the money supply exercised by the banking system, like I said, is called monetary policy. Monetary policy controlled by the Fed involves three main tools. First, setting the discount rate, which influences the interest rates of borrowing money. As interest rates increase, people have more incentive to put their money in the bank. As interest rates decrease, people have more incentive to borrow money, which puts money into the circular flow. The second tool the Fed or banks have is setting and modifying reserve requirements, which is the amount of money banks are required to maintain in their reserves. If they should increase the reserve requirements, money would come out of the circular flow. As they would lower their reserve requirements, money would go back into the circular flow. The banks don't change this, or I should say the Fed does not change this requirement very often. It's around 10% and remains that. Number 3. Open market operations refers to the buying and selling of government bonds. When the government sells bonds to people, Money comes out of the circular flow. As people cash in those bonds, as they come to maturity, that puts money back into the circular flow. The Fed's monetary policy is generally designed to control inflation and have an impact on unemployment. Inflation is a term which refers to more money being in circulation. It brings us back to this basic concept of economics, which we opened with and are going to refer to often, the concept of scarcity. As something becomes more scarce, its value tends to increase. As things become less scarce or more abundant, value tends to decrease. So as there is more money in circulation, the value of the dollar tends to decrease because it is less scarce. The less money in circulation, the more scarce it is, its value increases. I hope you enjoyed Circular Flow of Money and Goods PowerPoint Presentation Part 2. Next, we're going to launch into the review of the opening quiz. This is my way of introducing the course and some of its key concepts. We're going to explore scarcity, which is part of the foundation of why we even study economics. We're going to see how economics views needs versus wants. We're also going to see, by the review of this quiz, what is free according to economics. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.